As Folsom's term came to an end in 1950, many Alabamians breathed a long sigh of relief. Barred from a consecutive term by the state constitution, Folsom ran a hand-picked candidate instead. But the race would be won by Gordon Persons, a candidate of the establishment who promised to return decency and dignity to state government. Folsom refused to stay out of the news. Arrested for drunk driving in 1952, he declared it a plot by his opponents to prevent him from coming back. A parade of friendly witnesses swore Folsom was not drunk on the date in question. After a trial heavily publicized by the state's major newspapers ended in acquittal, he was ready for bear.
I want to say this to my opposition. And in spite of the newspaper slants, in spite of all my opposition's been able to put forth, if they think they've had a political fight in Alabama, they ain't seen nothing yet. I'll say this, damn the newspaper slants, damn the torpedoes full speed ahead.
I want to say there's one star in the crown of my administration, just one star. It's the enemies. The political enemies, if you will, that I have made since I have been governor of the state.
When Folsom entered the governor's race of 1954, the state's major newspapers again predicted he would fail. But Folsom was now well organized in every corner of the state, bringing along the local leaders who would help consolidate his power. Among them, a probate judge named George Corley Wallace, whose liberalism as a Folsom supporter in the 1940s had surprised his friends.
He says, Rich, you just ain't with it, buddy. That's the thing now. That's the move. That's what people want.
But Folsom had never trusted Wallace, unsure of his loyalties. He himself had said it. If they weren't for you, the more they knew, the more dangerous they were.
Thank you, Bill Smith. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say that I'm privileged to be here tonight in what I term the greatest and largest political rally ever held in the history of the state of Alabama. And I want to say this, ladies and gentlemen, that I had the pleasure of serving 4 years in the legislature of Alabama under the administration of Mr. Folsom, in which Folsomism came into existence. And I want to say that I also served 2 years in this present so-called decent and dignified administration. There are some people in Alabama who feel and who felt that when the masses of people, the grassroots, elected them a governor in 1946, that it couldn't be a decent and dignified administration. So, ladies and gentlemen, on May the 4th, you've got the choice of taking blockism, Personsism, or Folsomism, and I'll take Folsomism.
Once again, the newspapers opposed him. Again, in vain.
When I went in as governor, they said, you forget the mailbox road program. You forget proper representation in the legislature. You forget the progressive program that you advocated all over this state of Alabama. I turned them down flat-footed. So they went to the crossroads at Citronelle, here on the street corner, yonder in the courthouse, going around here saying what a big bad booker Jim Folsom was.
The charges of corruption and incompetence failed to stem the rising tide of Folsom's new campaign. Folsom received the largest majority in the state's modern history. A few weeks later came the historic decision of the United States Supreme Court in Brown versus Board of Education, declaring segregated schools to be unconstitutional. The Brown decision sent a shockwave across the South. At the Southern Governors Conference held in Florida late in 1954, Alabama's governor-elect found himself among a group of men nervously facing a critical decision: to obey the Supreme Court's new ruling or to fight it. A joint resolution was drafted urging opposition. Folsom refused to sign. A cloud hung over Folsom's inaugural parade. The storm over desegregation was about to begin.
You are not going to permit the NAACP to take over your school. You are not going to permit the NAACP to control your state. We have no intention whatsoever, and we shall not integrate our schools.
Folsom was by now accustomed to the raw use of power. He quickly pushed through the legislature a new program of road building, expanding the state docks, increasing the old age pensions he'd initiated in the 1940s.
Now, some folks say that's socialism. Well, if it's socialism, I'm for socialism.
But economic issues were rapidly losing ground.
The legislators practically stampeded over one another, introducing an incredible variety of bizarre legislation to buttress segregation and to keep schools from being integrated.
Folsom vetoed one segregationist bill after another, declaring he was not in favor of integration, but would not attempt to circumvent the United States Supreme Court.
He had already made it clear that he felt that it was inevitable that schools were going to be integrated, that the old segregated Southern way of life was over.
But tensions were already rising. In November 1955, Montgomery blacks invited Harlem Congressman Adam Clayton Powell, the object of hatred among many whites, to help launch a campaign for voter registration.
Governor Folsom, to the absolute dismay of many white Alabamians, not only loaned Congressman Powell his #1 tag limousine, the governor's limousine, but then he invited him over to the mansion for a drink. This was simply unheard of.
Reporters quickly jumped on the story, asking Folsom if it was true he'd shared a Scotch whiskey with Adam Clayton Powell.
Scotch and soda is what Powell said he had, and Big Jim snorted at that and said he never drank Scotch in his life. He drank the cheapest bourbon you could buy.
Many white Alabamians now accuse Folsom of throwing in his lot with the NAACP, whose consul, recent law school graduate Fred Gray, shared the governor's limousine with Congressman Powell.
Of course, according to the press, there was an adverse reaction. Of course, some of the white residents were enraged that the governor of the state would invite an African-American to the governor's mansion. I think the governor did what he would have done for any congressman, regardless of his color. And I think the position he simply took is that he was a congressman. I invited him there, extended the courtesy I extended, and so be it.
A matter of weeks after Powell's visit, black citizens of Montgomery began the historic bus boycott that would launch the civil rights movement as an unstoppable force in American culture. The city that was once the cradle of the Confederacy now saw the inauguration of a new leader.
We will continue to protest in the same spirit of love and nonviolence and passive resistance.
The violence began. The home of Martin Luther King and those of several others shattered by bombs.
I was working with a lady on the Woodley Road, and she came to the sink where I was, said, "What do you niggers want? We have given you everything you've got. What do you want now?" I say, you haven't given us anything. We have worked for everything that we have, and you have paid us.
Shaken by the public's response to the Adam Clayton Powell affair, Folsom tried to appear even-handed, offering a reward for the arrest of boycotters who had engaged in acts of violence, as well as those responsible for the bombings.
As governor will see that they are prosecuted in the court where anarchists are tried.
But secretly, Folsom was meeting at the mansion with Martin Luther King in an effort to mediate the dispute between the boycotters and the city of Montgomery. When the city refused to listen to his plea, Folsom reportedly urged King to push his demands even further.
The whole world is looking at Alabama today. They're looking for us to do something towards peace. Peace between the races. I've asked you here.
Hoping to promote a dialogue between blacks and whites, Folsom assembled the state's newspaper editors, most of whom had been against him from the start, to solicit their help.
The judges, the legislators.
The Montgomery Advertiser responded, Folsom has deeply offended and estranged public opinion in Alabama.
Help me to arrive
He is now paying a price for his folly.
some solution